Hello guys, I'm Super Ron, welcome back to the G-Unit and welcome to episode 25 of my GBS Zero build. In this episode we're going to be building up this high compression C20XE Vauxhall engine. We've got all the parts machined, we've got all the components ready, so let's have a pivot around and get on with that. And these are all the components that are going to be built up today into this high performance, high compression RedTop screamer to go in the kit car. If you've tuned in before, you'll know that I had quite a lot of these components already at the G-Unit and they've come off my C20 Red Astra in the corner because the C20 turbo engine and the C20XE normally aspirated engine are in fact very similar, almost identical. The only difference is the turbo has lower compression pistons and different profile cams. So all the performance items I've built up for that car over the years, I can now use on this build as well. So let's start on the bits that came off the Astra. We've got this billet flywheel from TTV, so that's going to be nice and strong, really light, so it's going to be really revvy, perfect for this build. We've got ARP head stud conversion, so they're nice and strong and reusable, so that's going to clamp down the head onto the block because we're going to be running some quite high compression in here. We've got a genuine Z20 oil pump, which is much stronger than the C20 pump. As you can see on the shelf, the offerings to the God of Speed, we have an exploded C20 pump, and that's off the Astra that let go one day on the rolling road, exploded and seized the bottom end. So I bought this one. I know it's genuine because I bought it straight from Vauxhall way back in the day. And I got a modified oil pickup pipe from Nortec Performance. They used to build these back in the day. It's a bit of a C20 Z20 hybrid. I've got to check whether that's going to work because now we're using a rear-wheel drive Westerfield sump. So I've just got to check if the heights are the same. If not, we may have to do a little modification on that. And also out of the Astra, we've got these steel H-beam rods with ARP rod bolts. So they're going to be nice and strong, handle the RPM and not cause us any problems. So what I did say is the turbo engines were low compression. So that is something we had to change here. So I managed to pick up these high compression Amiga pistons off eBay. It was a lucky late night find. Bear in mind, these are £500–600 pistons. And I spotted these ones for sale for £50, which I thought maybe a bit odd, maybe a bit of a scam, maybe it's just for one. But what they said is they used them on a dyno engine and then they wanted to change compression. So they swapped out the pistons and put these up for sale. So I put a bid in, I was the only bid, I won it, and a week later, through they came. And they were exactly like this. They were actually pretty much brand new. You could see they've had hardly any use at all. There was no carbon on them. They were as you saw them here. And all the rings were in good condition, came with the pins and everything. So when I took this C20XE RedTop block from an Astra GSI down to the machine shop, I got them to bore these out to match the Amiga pistons and also check all the rings. And they said they were all well within spec. So they're able to gap the rings and get everything fitting perfectly. So these are labelled 1, 2, 3, 4 and they've been matched in each piston, so they need to go back in their exact bore. Much like the valves, when we lapped them in, we had to keep them all in order because each one was individually machined to each hole. The same with these, the rings have been gapped to each cylinder, so I need to make sure they all go in their correct places. I did still have the crank out of the Astra, but I was lucky enough to find this very early Astra GTE crank, which is from the 20XE engine, and it has these cutouts compared to the standard one. So there's a lot less material and it makes them a lot lighter, which is perfect for the high revving XE engine. So that's all the parts that I got second-hand used and from other sources. But for the gaskets, the shells, I got all them from Nevlock Performance. They've been helping me out a lot on my builds lately. I've got the shells for the big ends and the mains. I've got the full airing gasket set. I've got the sump gasket. I've got the ARP flywheel bolts. I've got the genuine gates cam belt kit. So as always, they came through in brilliant time and sorted me all out. So thanks Nevlock for that. So I think that's enough jibber jabber. We need to start assembling. So the first thing we need is the block. So I'm going to give this a full scrub down. It has had a clean already, but it's been sitting around. I just want to blow all the oilways out, all the waterways, and make sure it is all spotless again. So let's get back to cleaning. Lucky I kept all that old petrol from the Zafira last week, so I'm going to use that to do all the degreasing, save some money. And the other thing I'm going to do, I've got this thread repair kit, so I'm going to go down all the threads, every single one, especially these sump ones, because they get all gooed up with sealer and everything. Just make sure everything is spotlessly clean. I know I said spotless a lot in the head building episode, but you really have got to get everything spotless. You don't want any grit or grime running around your engine when it is all finished. So once it's built up, once it's all together and sealed up, it's going to be absolutely perfect. And there we are, all cleaned up, absolutely spotless inside and out, and we should be full of joy and ready for assembly. But I've got some bad news. Now that I've cleaned this all up, got all the grime off, along the top, I found this. The block has got a crack in it, and it goes all the way down inside, and it's all the way on the outside as well. Goes from here, cracks here, along here, all the way here, all the way down under there. So I don't think it's a power or heat thing. I bought this block just as a random block, and the only thing I can guess is that it's been dropped. So that is a big blow. I've had this block bored out to suit the pistons, but now it seems it is just one big paperweight. You can see there, it's even started to pull apart a bit at the top. So I don't really know what to do. I think what I will do before I completely ride it off, I'll just go down and see the engine builder and see if he suggests anything. But as you can see, all the way down here, that's all a crack all the way through, inside and out. What a bummer. So I'm going to fly down to Coltec and just see what he thinks, to see if he thinks it's worth repairing, or whether it is repairable, or whether it's just best to get another block. What a bummer. So let's see what they say. Well, we're back to the G unit. I took the afternoon off and enjoyed that lovely sunshine. It's hard to get upset on a lovely day like this. So I spoke to Richard at Coltec and he says it's quite a strange brake. It is really odd. He says it doesn't look like an impact, like it's been dropped, because these are very vulnerable for snapping the edge off where the starter motor is, or any little lobes. As soon as you drop them, that'll just snap off. And it's quite common to see a weld through here and through here where the starter bit snapped off or whatever, but there's no damage here either. The other point of impact could be from the inside out if a rod let go, but there's nothing on the inside to suggest that. What he thinks has happened is someone's tried fitting the bell housing and it is either not engaged into the clutch, or maybe a dowel wasn't engaged, and they've done it, all the bell housing bolts up really tight, and that has just snapped this flange out and caused this crack all the way down. So he suggested a local engineer, and a few other people have suggested him as well. Mick Jackson, he's the one that does all the extraordinary welding around this area. And he said, to be honest, if this was the last block in existence, it possibly could be repaired. You'd have to heat the whole thing up in an oven and then gas weld it. And it'd probably need to sit there for 12 hours at a constant temperature and then all let cool down together so nothing shrinks. And then you still have to then have all the faces machined because it had got so hot. So he said, to be honest, it would probably be cheaper to get another block and get the machine work done again. And also it'd be guaranteed, because cast is very tricky to weld, especially on such an intricate bit like this. And then you could have problems with the sump sealing and everything else in the future. So I think, unfortunately, I'm going to have to take this as a lesson learned. This was just a random block I picked up years and years ago. I think I paid £50 for it, and it looks like it's just one of those things. So we're not going to be rebuilding it today. We're not going to be using this block. This is just going to be a very pretty, very expensive coffee table, I think. So maybe on eBay, maybe a bit of merch, glass top on it, super on, coffee table, £600, anybody? But I'm not going to dwell on it. I'm not going to let it get me down. We've got to move on. I've got another complete RedTop there. I've got a turbo block there. I've got another turbo block in the shed. So we have got plenty of blocks that I can use, get remachined. But it just seems such a shame to have had all this done, put all the money into it and all the time into it, cleaning it all up, getting it everything blowed out. Even today, going through, getting all the threads cleaned out. But we'll just call this life experience. So I think the next job is going to be working out which block we are going to use. So this is another C20XE. It's just been sitting under the bench for quite a long time. I'm pretty sure I did pick this up with the block. He was getting rid of the block and having this as a clear out as well. I was kind of planning to keep this as a whole engine in case I want to put it in something one day. But needs must, so I think I'll take it apart. It's quite a few years ago, but I'm pretty sure he said one of the head studs or head bolts snapped in it or something. So I'm going to take it apart, assess the situation, see if we do use this or use another one. So I'm going to whip the head off and see what we can find. So that's the top end all off. The cylinder head and everything looks really nice in there. All the cams, lifters, genuine INA lifters still in there. genuine INA cam belt kit, that all looks good. But it's definitely been apart because I took this head off and there was no head gasket. So it's definitely a bit more apart than I remember. And sure enough, as I did think, this one has got a head bolt snapped in it. So it is still in there. Whether they were doing it up or undoing it, I'm not sure. But the bottom end does still spin, turn over by hand all right. So it looks all right. The bore's a bit scruffy. I did notice that these oil ways here, hard to see on camera, are a lot deeper than on my block where they're quite shallow. I'm not sure what the distance is, but this is a HH3 block and this one is a HG2, so I'm not sure on the years. We can look on the cam carriers and it looks like the cylinder head is a 93. So if it matches the engine, that's where they started life together. But it looks okay in there. But yeah, it's just this has got a head stud stuck in there. But if that does come out, then we'll be plain sailing. So I think I'll carry on with this one, taking it apart and see how far we can get. And there's the sump off, crank out. It really does look a really nice original engine. Still got the two-piece sump gasket, got the full-size crank in it, and all the shells and bearings look in fantastic condition. So there's no wear there at all. So this, as a start, is a lot better engine than I started with. So I'll carry on getting everything out and see what the bores look like. Well, this has certainly escalated. This is not what I'd planned to do today. I was just going to fit that block up, put the pistons in, get the engine together, and here we are with another engine all in pieces. So here's what I found stripping this engine down. This is a much later engine than my previous block. They're cast on the side. So this one's an HH3, and during the production of the RedTop engine, they went HH1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 9, and then they started HG 1, 2, 3, and 4. So this is an HG2. So this is quite a late engine. So this is quite probably matched to its head because we saw the head was a 93 on the cam caps. So this is one of the later blocks, which people do tend to prefer. And I've just looked in the top and it has got the male pistons in there. So I won't be using them for this build, but that is a real good. It's got the forged pistons, which is strange because I thought they were on the earlier ones, but it has got them. They're stamped on the inside. So we have got quite a late block here and it is in great condition. All the shells are fine, so it's not had any problems with oil delivery or blocked galleries or anything like that. So I'm a bit stuck with what to do now because we've got this block in great condition, but it has had this snapped off head stud. And I've cleaned it up and blown it all out, and you can see that it is I think they have tried to drill it out, but I measured the distance between the top of the head down to the bottom of the hole on that one and on this one, and this is only halfway drilled out. It's still got another 10 mil of snapped off bolt in there. So I'm not really sure which way to go. If we can get this out, then this is going to be a perfect candidate. I'll just get the machine work redone in here, get this board out to suit the pistons, and then we'll be all good to go. But it all depends if we can get this snapped bolt out. And another thing, if you remember from the last episode on the GBS Zero, a couple of weeks ago, we rebuilt the Coscast cylinder head and we got it all finished and all built up. But I wasn't quite happy with how the valve springs were sitting with the top retainers. You could move the retainer inside the valve spring because the springs were much bigger than standard. So on them they had Kent Cams 2004, and I couldn't find anything on that part number. So I spoke to Kent Cams, and I spoke to a guy called Andy there, and he was really, really helpful. He told me everything I needed to know, and he was actually quite surprised that I had these springs, because that number at the bottom is actually a date. These were pre-production, so they don't have part numbers on them. So these were actually from 2004. So he was quite surprised that they were 16, 17 years old and I still had them. But it's not such a big thing being so old, because as we said, this head has been sitting on my shelf in the shed for 12 plus years. So that probably is about right. So once we found out they were actually VS55 springs, which is what the production part number went on to be, and these should have different top hats, like the retainer at the top, it should be bigger, so they locate in the top of the valves instead of moving around like they are here. So when the person that built the head put it together with these early valve springs, they didn't put the correct retainers on, which meant that there has been movement in there. He says he doesn't think that is what the cracking in the collets was. That's more likely to be down to valve flow at some point in its life, which I'm not sure whether it is in my use, because I only had standard cams, but we did have a lot of rev limit action, we did have a lot of boost, so I don't know. But we've got the new collets, but for these springs, we are going to need different top hats. So we went through the specs of the spring and the specs of the cam, because they're SBD cams going in, and he said it was very much on the borderline of whether these springs are going to be up to the job. Because as we saw, these cams are massive. I had to ground out all the lobe holes in here for the cams to be able to rotate. So it does look like we're right on the border. So I spoke to SBD, because Kent Cams didn't quite have a cam identical to the SBD ones, so they couldn't do an exact comparison to say if the valves will be okay with these springs in. So I spoke to SBD and they've come back and said these valve springs aren't going to be up to the job of these cams. So this does mean I'm going to have to go down the double valve spring route, which does mean double valve springs, top retainers, bottom seats and thinner valve stem seals. So I'm not really sure what to do at the moment. We could just run smaller cams and keep this as it is, but I am still going to have to buy different retainers because the standard ones won't work with these. So it's either go all in or ditch the cams, go for something smaller and just run with less power. So I think the obvious answer to that is we want as much power as possible, and I want to run these big cams. So I think I am going to have to go down the route of taking these back out and putting double valve springs with Kent seats in and retainers and different valve stem seals. So it's not going to be too much work to change these. As you saw me put them in, it doesn't take long. We can whip them in and out, not too bad, but it is going to be a massive dent on the budget, because just the double valve springs are about 250 quid. The retainers are about another 150 quid. Plus we need different valve stem seals. So we're probably getting up to £400–500 in valve train. But then I know this will be absolutely bulletproof, so there is that, but that's still a decision I need to be made. But if I've got the option of going for less power and more power, my hands are tied, I'll have to go for more power every time. So I think the cams will be staying. We're going to have to deal with finding some double valve springs and going from there. So it's not been great news in this episode, it's been a bit doom and gloom, because I've only just found out literally this moment. I've got the email through from SBD saying that the cams aren't going to work with those springs. So we've got a block that's not going to work, we've got valve springs that are not going to work. We've got this block which is in pristine condition except for a snapped bolt. So we've got lots of decisions to be made. I think what I'm going to do is, we've got a nice late block here, the stronger block. If we can get this out, I can then get this board out, get it machined and put all the Omega high compression pistons in, and then we're going to have to get the valves gear for that head, and then that can go on. So at the beginning I was kind of thinking, why don't we just weld this up, it'll be fine and we'll just carry on as we are. But the more I look at it and the more people I speak to, we might be able to weld it. But even if we do the full weld, it's probably going to be up to the cost of this. If we just do a patch up job, it's always going to be there. It could possibly crack again. And the last thing I want to do is get it all finished and then have a leaking block. So we've got some decisions to be made. It hasn't been an engine building video like I promised, but I'm sure you can understand the hurdles we have to jump through. So I'm going to start boxing up all these parts, getting them all together, keeping these all separate to my other stuff. But I think I will be using this block, so we just need to find a way of getting this snapped bolt out. So that's a job for me to do, and I'll be sure to fill you in with what route we go to. If you've got any suggestions, what route you think we should go, with the block, with the boring out, with the welding, with the valve gear, make sure you let me know, because I've got a lot of thinking to do. But until next time, make sure you have fun.